Schools Minister Nick Gibb, who joins us to talk about the new announcement about, well, how our youngsters doing GCSEs and A-levels are going to be judged this year. Good morning to you, Nick.
Good morning,
Good
Julia.
morning. Well, once again, you're wading into the controversy that is always exam grades, even in normal years without pandemics and lockdowns. But the decision has been made not to even attempt to go with any algorithms this time round, to go straight for the teacher assessments. End of year's exams, not even required, not required under test conditions, could even be taking place at home. And basically, it's going to be up to the teachers what youngsters get. This is a recipe for grade inflation on an industrial scale, isn't it?
Well, the best system is, of course, exams, and that's what happens in a normal year. They're the fairest system for judging students. But we took the decision in January that exams this year would not be fair because of the pandemic and the disruption that students have faced. And so instead of exams, we're going to be awarding grades so that students can move on to the next stage of their lives uninterrupted by the pandemic, based on the teacher assessment. And teachers know their students best. But that teacher assessment, of course, is protected also by quality assurance. The teachers will need to show a range of evidence for the decision that they've made about which grade the student should have for a particular subject. There'll be quality assurance processes in place at the school level. They'll be signed off by the head teacher. There'll be a lot of guidance and training from the exam boards for teachers about how to come up with that, how to determine that grade. There'll also be quality assurance from the exam boards once those grades are submitted on the 18th of June, based on a sample basis and on a risk basis. So, for example, a school that submits grades that are way out of line with previous years, that will be a risk factor that will trigger a visit by the exam board. So there's a whole raft of measures to make sure that those grades are as fair and as consistent as possible.
Okay, so the message to teachers will be mark them up one grade. Don't give Johnny, who normally gets a D and A grade prediction, because that will be called out. But if you mark them up one grade, you'll probably get away with it. Why wouldn't a teacher do that?
No, they'll have to have evidence that demonstrates why the teacher wants to give that student that grade. They will be the students will be assessed on what they have been taught and not on what they have not been taught because of the disruption to the pandemic. But this is the fairest system. We've worked very closely over the last few months with the exam boards, with the regulator, with teachers, with teacher representative organizations to make sure that we come up with a system that is the most workable and fairest system that we can devise, other than exams. There'll also be exam materials from exam boards, question banks that teachers can select and set students to take as another piece of evidence that teachers have to validate the grade that they're
And the schools that do give sort of wildly out of proportion grades, they will be, you say they're going to go to visit via the exam board, and then the exam board can then test those children themselves? How are they going to?
No, they'll look at the evidence that the teacher has produced for those grades, and where it's very clear that that's not based on a proper exercise of academic judgment, that they will require the school to resubmit the grades that conforms to that evidence.
And the grades are going to be given out much earlier than the mid-August timetable we normally see, to give children, well, partly also because we don't have a load of exam papers needing to be marked over the summer, but also to give children a longer period and schools a longer period to actually appeal themselves. Roughly when should youngsters expect those grades to be given out?
A-level grades, the results will be on August the 10th and GCSEs on August the 12th. And we did bring it forward by a week or so, 2 weeks for GCSEs, in order for there to be time for any appeal process. In a normal year, there are tens of thousands of remarking of exam grades that schools seek for their students. But we wanted there to be a time available after the results are published for any appeals to the exam boards that schools are submitting on behalf of their students.
Now, I completely understand the efforts to sort of try and make this fair. And it's not fair to judge a child who's had no live Zoom lessons at all this year, been off school for weeks and weeks and weeks, and with a child who's had Zoom lessons every single day from their school. It's simply not a level playing field. But when will it be a level playing field? Because we obviously, the emphasis right now is on, kids doing GCSEs this year or A-levels this year. but all the work that goes into those exams does actually start much sooner. So the children who are 1 year behind, well, will it be fair for them to be sitting the same exams as other children who've had far more lessons than them over the last year? What about the year before that? The year before that? What about the children who've missed such important, so the groundwork, the foundation work in their primary school years? They're going to be behind. There's a real concern from educational experts that these children will possibly be behind their entire lives. When does it become fair again?
These are absolutely the issues that schools are grappling with, that the government is addressing. So yesterday we announced a £700 million package of catch-up, and that builds on the £1 billion catch-up programme that we had in place for this year.
It's a drop in the ocean, though, isn't it?
No, these are very significant sums of money, and schools
per
are
pupil.
Also,
they're under £200 per pupil.
Well, the £1 billion was about £80,000 for a big secondary school, and this additional money now is about £22,000 for a typical the recovery premium that's going to all schools. And on top of that, there's the national tutoring program, one-to-one tuition, and the summer school program. These are all programs that we're putting in place to help catch up. But schools know that this is their bread and butter about helping children to catch up. But we're very conscious that these year 10s have also suffered, the students taking GCSEs next year, and we will be working through the consequences of that in determining what we're going to do about exams in 2022, and that's the work that has already started, ready for next year.
And have you just accepted the fact that we are just going to have grade inflation and that's it? I mean, last year, in terms of children getting A or A star or equivalent in numbers 7, 8, 9 levels, we saw 5.2% more than a quarter of all results at that level. We saw a grade inflation at every level, C and above. Have you just accepted that's just going to have to be sort of a cost of doing business this time round? But of course, that cost of doing business and trying to be fair to all the children who would otherwise be marked down means that universities are going to find it very difficult to decide who's going to get in, aren't they? They're going to have the same number of places, pretty much, but they're going to have vastly more pupils who've got the grades to get in. How does that work?
Well, I described just earlier when we were talking, Julia, about all the processes that are in place to make sure that those exams are as fair and are an accurate reflection of the attainment of those students.
But you're still going to have more people with top grades, just like you did last year. With the best will in the world. And I can understand the reasons, but you're still going to end up with a darn sight more kids with the top grades to get into their university courses. But you're going to have university courses, presumably the same number of places. So how does that work?
Well, the universities are very aware of the processes that we have conducted. We published the consultation on these details back on the 15th of January. So they will have reflected that in the offers that they have given to students. So we work very closely with UCAS and the university sector in determining this. But this is the fairest method of making sure that young people can move on to the next phase of their education. Okay. And then when you combine that with all the work that we're doing on catch-up to make sure that they can succeed in that next phase of education, you can see that we're doing our best to deal with the pandemic and the consequences for young people. Okay. And I think young people probably have suffered more than any other section of society. Yes. Other than the very elderly during this pandemic. And we have to make sure that we're doing everything we can. And teachers have been marvellous in the way that they have responded.
No, some teachers, lots of teachers, not all teachers. We've got to stop pretending that. Teachers have not all, otherwise every child would not be so far behind. Just finally, I want to ask you about masks. We were told that testing for children, rapid flow testing, that is not mandatory. I've certainly already said that my child will not be tested while she is healthy. It's totally unnecessary and not actually appropriate. But also, now we're told that the face masks in the classroom, that's not mandatory either. So parents listening to the show right now are totally entitled to send their children into school on March the 8th without wearing face masks in the classroom. They wear them during the corridors when they're passing perhaps other year groups or other classes, but they don't have to wear them in the classroom. Is that correct?
It's not mandatory for the school. The school will set its own school rules.
They can't send a child home for not wearing a mask if it's not mandatory.
Well, that's a matter for the schools, and there'll be a lot of discretion. Schools know how to deal with these very, very sensitive issues. But what we're trying to do is to do everything we can to minimize the risk of transmission of the virus within the school environment. Already they have in place hygiene methods, hand washing, students kept away from one another in different bubbles so they're not mixing unnecessarily, ventilation in classrooms. All these measures are designed to protect the school environment, to make it as safe as possible in terms of transmission of the virus. And this is another additional method to help that within those classrooms where they can't socially distance.
But no child will be sent home if they don't wear a mask in the classroom.
That's right. This is not mandatory on the schools, but of course, schools will want to make sure that pupils are obeying the school rules, but they will do so in a very sensitive way, given the very difficult issues during the pandemic.
Nick Gibb, Schools Minister, thank you very much indeed. Very much appreciate you joining. Robert Halfon, who's the chair of the Education Select Committee, and Tory MP for Harlow, who joins us once again. Good morning to you, Robert.
Good morning. Hello.
Morning. Well, we discussed this all last summer, didn't we? As all the different policies are announced around the UK, the 4 different countries, all coming up with different ways of dealing with how to mark grades for children who hadn't had any exams and had missed some of their learning. We then ended up seeing the Gavin Williamson, the Education Secretary, backing down in the end after it was felt that more children had had their exams grades, predicted grades, marked down by a computer algorithm. They abandoned that. Well, we now know it's been confirmed they're abandoning all algorithms this year. It's going to be teacher assessments overseen by head teachers and overseen further on by exam boards, but no requirement for any exams. And if they do them tests, those tests can be carried out in non-exam conditions. They can even be done at home. Is this a recipe for disaster when it comes to grade inflation, or is this the only fair way of doing this?
Well, the first point I'd make, it just shows all too clearly how damaging school closures have been and what the impact has been on students, because I would have preferred at least some exams would have taken place, at least in the core subjects like maths and English. And what I worry about, I understand there's no option but to have central assessed grades, but we're going to have a Wild West system where each school does something completely different. The grading is going to be based on what each child has individually been taught. So if a child has, let's say, for some reason or other, had very few lessons, the grade will be based on those lessons. And what I also worry about is that that saying it's not so much having your cake and eat it, but we're actually going to bake a rock cake of grade inflation into the system. That these assessments will be based on last year's exams or grading, which was pretty high, rather than the 2019 grading. And the government worked very hard to try and make sure that exams are valued by employers, and this grade inflation could be very damaging. And what I want to see from the government in Parliament today is a direction of travel to how they're going to make sure that exams in the future are valued by employers, and grade inflation will be baked out of the system, not in it.
Which was something that the government has been trying to do for many years. This all must have prizes, 25% of kids last year getting an A or an A star grade. And the pupils themselves, the parents, and indeed the schools that end up with a load of kids with loads of great grades, they're thinking, oh, this is absolutely fine. It's great for us. But actually it does tend to make those grades less meaningful. People are less impressed, the employers in the future. And of course, if you've got a quarter of the kids who've got the top grades applying to top universities, it makes it much harder for those universities to make the right decision and make sure the right kids who really do deserve those places are getting them. As you say, though, it's very difficult to think of any other way of doing this. When you've got such an unfair playing field. Not talking about a level playing field is off the scale. It's never been level anyway. Children are from a sinker state with a school where children are disruptive throughout the lesson, and teachers who couldn't care less, parents who aren't engaged. They want on a level playing field with kids at a top grammar school or a top private school, or even some of the top comprehensive, where they are totally engaged in the lessons and everything is there to support them. It's never been a full level playing field. But right now, I was saying a little earlier, we've basically got kids competing on the side of Snowdon, haven't we? Because some kids, like my own, they've had lessons throughout. All day, 6 hours, Zoom lessons, engagement. They've even had exams online. They've had all their homework marked, and other children have barely had anything at all. If the children are going to be marked based on what they've actually been taught, we're going to have children getting the same grade as another child when one of them has been taught the full curriculum and one of the children has been taught maybe a third of the curriculum. You're not comparing like with like.
Well, this is the problem, and it's going to be, as I say, a Wild West system potentially of exam grades. And my big worry is that employers, because at the end of the day, why do we do these exams? We do them because we want job security and prosperity and to climb that education ladder of opportunity. And if you're an employer, are you going to really value the exam results of this year, knowing that there's going to be a huge difference? Of course, it's making worse the haves and the have-nots in terms of education, because the disadvantaged have suffered the most. And we know that advantaged students who've been learning are going to have have some kind of proper tests and mini exams under this system. So this is what the government needs to provide reassurance on in the House of Commons. As I say, that they're going to bake grade inflation out of the system, not in it, and make sure that grades and exams, GCSEs and A-levels are actually valued by employers and universities.
Yeah, indeed. And again, I suppose you and I, having discussed this so many times, our listeners will know this right now. The first response should be, I wouldn't have started from here. I'd be starting from schools having been opened all this time. What do you make also of the rulings on masks? So children they're going to be handing out these rapid flow tests. We now know that those are voluntary. You can't have a mandatory swabbing of a child's nose for them to go to school. My child is certainly being opted out of that while she is healthy. If she's unhealthy, absolutely she'll get tested. If she's not, she won't be tested. But now it's become clear in the last 24 hours that wearing masks in the classroom, although it was suggested this was going to be mandatory, it's not mandatory. Schools will have it at their discretion. Should any child be sent home from school because they or their parents choose for them not to wear a mask?
Well, to be honest, the fact that I was so happy that the schools were going to be open again after months of being shut, that if all the children were told to wear a Boris bobble hat when he goes out jogging, I would have accepted it. But I'd like much more understanding about why children are expected to wear masks in the classroom. It is confusing for schools because I think the government needs to make a decision one way or the other, because if it's guidance and not in law, then parents can legitimately say that their children shouldn't wear them. And there are significant worries of children wearing masks inside classrooms, and we haven't had proper evidence come out about it yet. And the government have got to make a decision one way or the other. Is it guidance or is it compulsory?
Yeah. Well, what we spoke to the schools minister, Nick Gibb, this morning, made it quite clear that it is not mandatory. But what's interesting is this idea that they'll wear them for the next few weeks, then we'll have the Easter holidays, and then they'll review it with a view to, it would be clear that they wouldn't be wearing masks after Easter. It's weird. I'm fascinated by the design of a mask, which works in February and March, but not in April.
Well, the technology these days is quite extraordinary, but obviously it would be much better if children aren't wearing masks. But if they have to wear them, if it's the price for staying in school and keeping the schools open.
But that's the thing. And that's where I was sort of quite happy to wear a mask. And I think I was wrong last summer. And I said, well, look, if it makes some old dear feel more comfortable about going to the supermarket, I'll wear a mask. We often, people who don't agree with this stuff, say, we'll go along with it because at least we get the big thing, which is kids back in school. But it seems to me that everything we give in on that, even though there isn't actually a very strong medical case for it, indeed, there's a strong medical case against children wearing masks while they're trying to learn in terms of their health and their educational achievement as well, that we make a rod for our own back. I have a feeling that if kids go back wearing masks, they'll carry on wearing masks. And the psychotic people who seem to think that children are nothing but virus holders and givers, they'll be wanting them to wear them for the end of time.
Well, they're going to do it now until Easter, as you've mentioned. Let's see. Let's get the chief medical officer after the 2 weeks is up, 2 or 3 weeks is up, and say whether or not scientifically it makes a difference for children wearing masks in the classroom or not in terms of spreading the coronavirus. And if it's not clear, and if it doesn't, then clearly the masks should be, there should be no need.
But that shouldn't be the only criterion. That's the key thing. It's what is the cost? What is the downside?
No, I accept that. Absolutely, yeah. They should also assess the effect on students and the effect on teaching, and whether it does cause distress to young people wearing them in the classroom, whether the teachers can teach properly. And I know that Jeff Barton said that on your programme yesterday, and I completely understand that. And you are right that I am looking at the big thing, but it has been a big battle to get the kids back into school, and that's why I've tended to concentrate on the what you call the bigger picture. Yeah,
absolutely, and I completely understand why you've done that. As you've battled heroically. Again, the fact that we're even debating children going to school or not, I just still find absolutely mind-blowing. I don't know what the hell has gone to our country. I really don't. Robert Halfon, always appreciate you joining us, Chair of the Education Select Committee. Bobby Friedman is joining us now. He's barrister and political commentator. Bobby, I suppose, as Robert Halfon says, fight the battles one at a time. Different parents, children, teachers will have different views on this. But when it comes to the masks, do you think that children should be wearing masks in the classroom?
I think it depends which children. I think for sixth formers, there's a better argument for it. There does seem to be more evidence that they can spread the virus amongst themselves. I'm sceptical for younger children. I mean, I think chances are they going to do it effectively in the first place? I think that's got to be questionable. Secondly, I think it makes it really difficult to learn. It's a very long period of time to have that mask on. So I am a believer in wearing masks. I think people should wear their masks, but I think particularly for younger kids, I think maybe the benefits are far outweighed by the disadvantages, and the reality is it's just not going to work. And the fact we heard Nick Gibb saying that earlier, that it's not going to be mandatory. As soon as you say that, I think that undermines any chance of mask wearing being widespread.
My view is any parent who's very anxious about it, by all means, wear a mask. But send your kid to school in a mask if that makes you feel happier. But I don't see why their fears should mean that my child has to wear one. But there we are.